Good morning. President Biden has been missing in action on the debt ceiling, refusing to negotiate and putting our economy and the livelihoods of hardworking American families at risk. Even House Democrats are demanding that President Biden enter debt ceiling negotiations with Speaker McCarthy. House Republicans will pass a sensible debt ceiling solution that limits Washington's irresponsible spending, saves taxpayer dollars, and grows the American economy. President Biden must work with us, who represent the American people, to address our nation's spending and debt crisis. First, before we hear from some of my colleagues on the debt ceiling negotiation, I wanted to highlight two of our incredible members, Congresswoman Kim and Congresswoman Steele, to discuss the upcoming joint address by our ally, President Yoon of the Republic of Korea, celebrating the 70th anniversary of our critical alliance. I'll first turn it over to Representative Young Kim.
Thank you, Liz. I'm Congresswoman Young Kim, and I serve as chairwoman of the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee on House Foreign Affairs Committee, and also as co-chair of the Congressional Study Group on Korea. I'm honored to join my colleagues today as we welcome South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol to Washington, and also this is the year where we mark the 70th years of the U.S. Republic of Korea alliance. I'm especially excited to hear President Yoon's remarks at the joint session of Congress tomorrow. The United States Republic of Korea alliance is based on shared values of human rights, democracy, freedom, and a rules-based international order. While the security challenges the region faces have changed since the Korean War, our commitment to these values have not. As authoritarians in the Indo-Pacific region like Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping seek to rattle the bilateral and steadfast commitment, our alliance is not only important, it's necessary to counter rising threats and aggression in the Indo-Pacific. So why does this matter? Well, take a look at South Korea at night versus North Korea. South Korea is a friend in freedom, democracy, and human rights. Freedom must prevail over oppression. As a Korean American who grew up in South Korea in the aftermath of the Korean War and with relatives who defected North Korea, I know firsthand the evils of oppression. So I'm proud to represent the vibrant Korean American community in Southern California and to be one of the first Korean American women to serve in Congress. As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm committed to strengthening our relationships with allies, holding authoritarian regimes accountable, and uplifting freedom-loving people trapped under their regime. Thank you. And now I yield to Congresswoman Michelle Steele.
Thank you, Young. This week is monumental for Korean Americans. President Yoon's historic visit is the first time in over a decade that the president of South Korea has spoken to a joint session of Congress. I was born in Korea, grew up in Japan, and immigrated to the United States when I was 19 years old. For me and my constituents, the friendship between United States and the Republic of Korea is valuable beyond measure. That is why I introduced the bipartisan, bicameral resolution to welcome President Yoon to the United States and honor the 70th anniversary of the Mutual Defense Treaty between our two nations. Our relationship is critical in preserving peace and stability in the region, and our trade partnership is vital to both of our economies. President Yoon has worked hard to improve relations with Japan, which is important to ensure our three nations may work together to protect freedom and democracy. I am honored to join my colleagues in introducing this resolution to recommit to our shared bond between country of my birth and the country I am so blessed to call home. Thank you, and I'm going to invite Chairman Arrington.
Thank you, Rep. Steele. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jody Arrington. I'm from West Texas, the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world. I'm honored to serve as budget chairman, and I can summarize the fiscal state of the nation. It's bleak, and the path forward is very, very uncertain. Nobody can look at the balance sheet of our federal government or the nonpartisan CBO's budget outlook and not shudder at the rapid deterioration of our nation's financial health. No responsible leader in this country worth their salt would, in a debt limit situation and negotiation where we look at our nation's indebtedness and its impact on the financial health of our country and our children's future, and not do something about it. What we're asking President Biden to do is to do what he did when he was vice president. Do what he did simply when he was in the Senate. Come to the table and put common sense spending controls and fiscal reforms as we raise the debt ceiling, pay our bills, and protect the good faith and credit of the United States. Folks in West Texas, and I imagine across the country, see that as pretty straightforward, especially, Madam Chair, as they suffer under the effects of the $10 trillion in spending over the last 2 years, $6 trillion added to the national debt, record inflation, soaring interest rates, and a nosedive into recession. That is the reality of the rest of America. And so they're tightening their belts, and they're changing their spending habits, and by God, the people in this town who represent this great nation, who are responsible for funding this government, need to do the same. I was at the Rules Committee hearing last night, 6 hours, required all the stamina I could muster and patience. But I think there are a few things that are noteworthy that I would like to share with you. Number one, I didn't hear any of my Democrat colleagues challenging or pushing back on the substance of our debt ceiling proposal. I think it's that straightforward. I think it's that common sense to right-size the bureaucracy coming out of COVID. Go back to 4 months ago where we were spending just 4 months ago. Obama's last year of his budget had us spending at that level. So I think there's consensus that that is extremely reasonable. And then you got the list of reversing some of the reckless spending items like the student loan cancellation, the army of IRS agents and the like. But I didn't get any pushback last night substantively on what we have been presenting. Secondly, I didn't hear a single Democrat offer up in 6 hours an alternative item of savings. We're at $1.5 trillion in annual deficits today. That's what we're borrowing. We'll be at $3 trillion in 10 years. We're at $500 billion in interest payments. We'll triple that in 10 years and be paying $1.5 trillion. And not one time in 6 hours of this conversation about how we right size, how we get on the right track that is sustainable and responsible, and not one alternative. Just a bunch of boogeymen, just a bunch of phantom funding cuts that they rolled out there. It was sad because it was a party that's lost its way, that has lurched so far to the left, they can't even come back to the common sense Clinton era work requirements for able-bodied adults. I saw them have a death grip on the blank check and the status quo, and they will lose that fight. They will lose that fight with the American people. It's not about me. It's not about these guys. It's about the American people. Lastly, this one, I get emotional about it. So, but because it's real. This is real. The most vulnerable group in America, in my mind, and there are lots of vulnerable groups, and we have to be responsible, and we have to prioritize. That's what this is about, prioritizing. But it's also about protecting the future as we prioritize, and our children's future. I think the most vulnerable group in America are the children that have no place in this town, no lobbyists to speak of that I know of, no seat around the table, it feels like, and they're going to inherit $31 trillion in debt and counting. Who's going to speak up for them? This is what they will inherit, and somebody's got to speak up. But in 6 hours, and I close with this, in 6 hours, and you'll never invite me back to another one of these press hearings, but in 6 hours, I heard a lot of stakeholders in government programs and government funding. I heard a lot of groups and communities. I never once, and I said this at the hearing, if you listen to the 6 hour tape, not one time did my Democrat colleagues mention the children and grandchildren of the people here, the future generation of Americans who will inherit the whirlwind because of the seeds that were sown of reckless spending and an insatiable appetite to spend this country into bankruptcy. So I'm going to support this Limit, Save, Grow, obviously, and it's a responsible thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and I pray to God that we'll get our president, respecting him in the office, to come to the table and be a leader worthy of the citizens of the United States of America.
We will now hear from our whip, Tom Emmer.
Hold the applause. Hold the applause. House Republicans are going to pass this debt limit. We are going to show that people the American government doesn't have to be dysfunctional. And by the way, we're also going to show that Republicans, House Republicans under Kevin McCarthy, are the ones that are continuing to lead. We're going to pass this because the alternative is far worse. Don't be fooled. There is no such thing as a clean debt ceiling increase. That's about as dirty as it gets. Handing Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden a blank check for more of their reckless spending that's driving inflation and destroying family finances that Jody was just talking about. With this transformational bill, House Republicans have the opportunity to effect change and implement reforms, all while avoiding default. Joe Biden and Senate Democrats have done absolutely nothing but obstruct. Members of Biden's own party now want him to do the responsible thing and negotiate. Instead, what's he doing? He's already threatening a veto. He is playing with Americans' lives and the economic health of our nation, all in the name of his political theater. It's truly disgusting and revolting. Our members built this legislation from the ground up, and our members are going to pass it. House Republicans, again, are the only ones that are armed with solutions to this problem. It's time for Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer to show us what they're made of. And now, I'm going to turn it over to the Tiger from Louisiana, our majority leader.
Thank you, Whip. This is a critically important week for the future direction of our country. For too long, and especially over the last 2 years, we've seen Washington go on a spending spree unlike anything in our nation's history. Joe Biden has maxed out the nation's credit card. And now at this moment, where the credit card is maxed out, Joe Biden has gone into hiding, trying to run out the clock and create a debt crisis, demanding not that we address the spending problem that maxed out the credit card, but believe it or not, Joe Biden is demanding that he get another card to go max out. No family in America would run their household that way. And frankly, I think when you look at the polls and see how low Joe Biden's numbers are, nobody in America thinks that this is the responsible way for the commander-in-chief to lead this country. But if Joe Biden won't lead, House Republicans will. And that's why you will see us pass a bill this week to address the debt ceiling, but also at the same time to address the spending problem that brought us to this moment. I think people are hungry for this moment. They're hungry for this kind of leadership. You've seen it from Speaker McCarthy. Jody Arrington, whose bill it is, to all of us on this leadership team who have been working for weeks and months with all of our members representing every part of our conference. Anybody willing to bring ideas to the table, and there have been some really good ideas, and if you look at this package, it represents the most common sense, straightforward approach to addressing the spending problem that got us here as we confront the debt ceiling. Think about this, basic work requirements. You know, the voters of Wisconsin just a few weeks ago were asked this question: should people have to try to find work in order to get welfare benefits? Do you know that 79.9% of Wisconsin voters just a few weeks ago on a statewide ballot said absolutely yes? People understand that. At a time when every worker, every small business is looking for workers, President Biden is paying billions of dollars to pay people not to work. So when we say let's have some basic work requirements, we're not talking about small numbers. It's over $100 billion of savings that the taxpayers would get. That single mom that's working 2 or 3 jobs right now to make ends meet under this tough economy, she doesn't want to have to pay for somebody who's sitting at home working who's fully able-bodied. And the important thing of bringing some of these important common sense measures like work requirements is not only does it save taxpayers money who are working hard, it also helps shore up programs like Social Security. We'll be able to put tens of billions of dollars back into Social Security, a program that Joe Biden has undermined with his reckless policies. We strengthen those programs by putting basic work requirements back in place. These aren't new ideas. These are ideas that Bill Clinton agreed with a Republican Congress to do back in the 1990s, and it worked, and it will work again. These are proven solutions to this nation's spending problem. And so we're proud to bring this bill forward. We're proud to get this bill passed this week. But it's long past time that President Biden stop hiding, stop trying to run the clock out. It's been over 2 months since he said he would sit down with Speaker McCarthy again and meet, and yet he's refused to do that. You now have a growing drumbeat of Democrats who are saying that it's time for President Biden to sit down with Speaker McCarthy. The country knows we can't stay on this unsustainable path. And if Joe Biden's not willing to lead and do something about it, House Republicans are. That starts this week. With that, we'll be happy to take some questions. Chad.
Good morning. This is kind of the dress rehearsal for what comes later this summer when the Senate gets a hold of this, and then also what happens with the president. With that concern, though, if it's that hard to get your side in order and not have to do this last-minute maneuvering, what does that portend for the summer, and does that give confidence to the markets in this process?
I wouldn't call it hard as much as thoughtful. There has been a lot of hard work that's gone into how best to start this negotiation. Speaker McCarthy, again, over 2 months ago, did get the opportunity to sit down with President Biden. It would be a lot easier if Democrats were actually part of this conversation. You know, the American people have been part of this for a long time because they do this every day in their household. They figure out how to make ends meet with the dollars that they take in. This federal government, under President Biden, when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were running everything for the last 2 years, have gotten us to a point that for every $100 that comes in, the government is spending $129. You can't keep doing that. And so we would really like it. It'd be a lot easier if President Biden was sitting at the table with the speaker saying, okay, let's come up with ideas of how to solve this problem. But because they walked away from the table, we said, we're not going to just sit back and run the clock out like President Biden. We're going to do it on our own. And so this bill represents a lot of really good ideas. If they've got better ideas, as Chairman Arrington said, not one idea was presented by Democrats yesterday. Not one concern for the young people of America who will pay this tab was expressed by Democrats. But we care about that.
Speak a little bit to the changes that were made last night where you were Chairman Arrington with regards to like the biofuel credits, how that impacted the overall bill, if it did,
Yeah,
and also where there's still some
There were some technical changes to address dates and alignment. If you look at the tax credits, for example, in the initial draft, it repealed all of the tax credits, but some of those tax credits were not part of the IRA, that legislation. Some were actually in place before that, so the intention wasn't to get rid of all of those, just the ones that were created in the IRA. And if you look at the scoring, it was really focused on that. So those clarifications were made to address that. Then on the work requirements, if you looked, there were three main components, SNAP, TANF. Not all of them aligned up on the same dates of implementation, so we wanted to make sure they all aligned on the same dates of implementation.
Just clear, are you holding the vote today, the final vote? And do you have the votes? There were still some significant no's out there.
So the good news is that we can vote as early as today on this. We're going to bring the rule shortly, 1:30. We'll be bringing the rule vote, which allows us then to bring the bill up, and it addresses the changes that were made. So we'll be ready to move as early as today. I wouldn't, tune out C-SPAN today if you're watching. We want to get this done as soon as possible, but more importantly, we want President Biden to finally start getting engaged in this process. You ask for the job of President of the United States to be not only the commander-in-chief, but also the leader of the free world. This is not a job where you run and hide when the going gets tough. This is the time where you step up. These are the moments that you come and run for these jobs to solve big problems. And I'm disappointed that the president is trying to run and hide during these toughest moments. And again, you're seeing Democrats. Each day over the last week, you've seen more and more Democrats coming out saying, President Biden's got to start negotiating with Speaker McCarthy. And I think you'll see that drumbeat even louder after we pass this bill. We'll do one more question. Well, I'll let the whip take it.
The bill was closed. You just heard it. There were technical changes that there's nothing of substance that was changed in the bill. So the bill was closed, and we will pass the bill.
Thank you guys. Good. See y'all on the floor.
Yeah. No, I got you. I'll hop towards the front. You want me to do like the low and then the high for?
Or yeah, can you just do like consistently pretty loud
Hmm?
since they're pretty loud.
She happens to sell seashells by the seashore. Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3. Testing testing 1 2 3. Hello, welcome to the press conference. She sells seashells by the seashore. Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3. 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14. Mic 1. I got you for sure. How's it going today?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Hello, hello.
Back to the trophies and bring it something better. I think you got 20 minutes.
How's everything?
A what? Fat Joe.
He's here today.
I know.
Yeah. Where's he at? He's at Triangle. I don't know what time he's here though.
Oh, good for him. Is he doing his healthcare thing?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because he does that commercials.
Yeah.
I photographed, I didn't realize his sister is like lead in one of those.
Oh, really? Like those little MLM type things? Facts.
Yeah, I photographed him at a party one time at Art Basel.
Yeah.
And I was like, strange joke over here. Then I went, well, then I asked this person. He said, that's his sister. I'm like, oh, now I understand why this.
Supporting family, I see.
Well, you go to these like art business groups, they always
Yeah.
there's like a whole rack.
Was it art based? Was it like NFTs and such, or like?
No, it was like
Wondering what level of like
cosmetics,
crypto schemes were on.
like cosmetic stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like
Was it Mary Kay?
No, it was like their own brand. They have a company in it's crazy.
That's,
It'll come to me.
Yeah, maybe that's why he's here.
Good for
He's
him.
gotta get a promotion.
He's, I guess an event like tomorrow too at Sequoia.
Yeah, I think the one today's with the Hispanic audience. I think.
Yeah, and
Yes.
then he has like a live music event tomorrow.
Man, what a time to be alive.
Like him, Rick Ross,
Oh boy.
Busta, and I think.
Oh, Rick Ross is here?
Mhm.
Oh, I
Cool.
did see, somebody else was talking about that.
Yeah, it's tomorrow. I RSVP because I'm not missing that.
That's pretty cool.
No, gotta finesse it. It's a work meeting.
It's a work event.
Exactly. Taking photos for work. How's everything here? Are you with Underwood?
Yes.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yes.
How's, I'm Sam. I'm with the studios and all that jazz. You
Oh,
guys
nice
like
to meet
need
you.
anything or anything like that?
I think we're good at this point, but I'll let you know. Thank you.
Sounds good here. I'm gonna pop into the front. Whoa, got it. Right over here. Which group you with?
I'm on scripts.
Oh, cool.
I see.
Yes, so right over here.
Baby. Melina. I found you. Hi. Why don't we eat up at the same place?
This place is like a maze. Oh my goodness.
I know. You get used to it though.
That's what everyone keeps saying.
You do. Alright. I've been here for 2 years and sometimes in the office buildings I'm still turned around. But for the Capitol, for the most part,
Yeah.
after 2 years I feel
You're good.
comfortable.
Okay, here we go.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Z. meet you.
You know, a little nicer over here. Is that a little nicer over here? Yeah, it's a lot calmer, cooler. Where you doing? Lemonade? Puerto Rico? Yeah, cool days. Does that work? No, for leisure. Oh, that's cool. Got a nice sunburn. It's been good. Only been there once, and it's for some like economics or politics things. Still recovering from a hurricane. How are they still? A little bit. There's some hits and misses, some definite reminiscent building stuff. Like where they left the dated buildings and just started building new ones. Stuff like that, like security stuff. Yeah. Cool, man. That's fun. What about you? Same old man. Same accidents. Yeah, pretty much. Like my in-laws were just in town because my wife worked trip to London. Oh. At least she's traveling. What's she doing again? She works at Nat Geo. Oh. I've heard of that. It's that regional magazine. Exactly. It's very cool. Got bummed out because I don't see vision. Just walk right into that. Yeah, I think it's really a big museum. They're actually going since Disney acquired all of Nat Geo. They're going to do this like total renovation of that area. It's going to be like the embassy's moving out. Yeah. I don't know if they're still doing this. They were talking about doing a Nat Geo hotel there. So that's cool. And but like that outside area is going to turn into this like event. It's basically Disney making it into the theme park. Yeah. That's the photo I'm looking for all day. I know. Gray haired grandfather clock. It's all about time. It's got that red dot. Yeah. In your face. Oh man. The line's actually really nice on there. But it's this weird little pocket eye. It is. It looks really good. I've already seen that in Detroit. No, I would never do that. I would just send it to you. Of course not. You know, falling over down the stairs. We're cleaning some of that. In his neighborhood? Yeah. Maybe you should move out or start buying guns because he's got like he prides himself on doorbell cameras or shootouts on his block. Hey, you're gonna get hit one of these. 6 teenagers. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? No. Is he okay? Photographer or I think shit. I think it was nice. I don't. That's what I'm saying. Like, dude, like. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, he's Trinidad. Yeah. In the middle of Trinidad. And there's pockets. There's like beautiful streets. Right. He's at is a little too far away from that. Where Carolina Rain is? Yeah, if you're like right by that, I feel like they have a patrol. Is that northeast? Yeah. And I said, listen, I don't live. You know, I live. I said, but you need that. What is he doing? He just walks right in. You know, so he's got that. Specialized or whatever? Something like this, not, but like they, his wallet, like something, you know. The only camera here is like that. saw him in his post. I texted him, said he was okay. Yeah. I was just throwing my wallet. Take my phone. That's what they want is your phone anyway. It looks. Because the problem with the cops are a zero. Anyway. Card, whatever. How long was it? Last weekend.
How did he not evade them on his bike?
That's what I was wondering too, because he's clearly a bicyclist. I would be.
Got some torque.
I would have taken that bike and threw it at him and ran. Just, but wonder if he was like maybe getting off it, walking. I don't know, like because some.
Maybe they just stopped him on the sidewalk and.
That's what I'm thinking.
and he
Or like
just,
talk to him. Conversation probably didn't turn initially,
Yeah, someone probably tried to chat him.
and then all of a sudden it went south.
He was at 9, right?
I think so.
Been calling him for a long time. Did you ever see this camera thing?
Yeah, the shootout was ridiculous. The shootout would have made me move.
Yeah.
It lit up his block right in front of his house. Like caught on his ring camera. So it's not even like down the block. It's like they crossed and they like opened fire with like some kind of automatic weapon fire. Whether it was a pistol or something, but it was just rapid fire succession. Chicago's got a huge issue with Glock switches are the, as they call it, the hood extender, but where they take the,
Welding.
yeah,
Hydraulic welding too, standard.
putting 25 rounds into a handgun.
The heat. That's what I mean. Like,
But how would they care? They're not caring because you didn't get rid of it. That's what I find. You see the pictures of like with a clip like this.
federal, league gets with like 10 years now.
At least. Probably they all come in the It's right there.
Really? They can
Because they can
weld them.
yeah. It's horrible. It's really bad. Like, the mayor gives all the stores closed on Michigan Avenue. The good ones. You still sending or you kill your battery?
You know, yeah, Indiana has a long history before gangsters. And Old West guys came from Indiana.
100%. Well, like Dillinger, he got,
He's famous for his.
he got woodworker, he got what's it called, like Safe Haven in Chicago, which is in Salem Town.
He's a woodworker, that's right.
Yeah.
Didn't he like fashion them down?
Yeah.
Is
And
that
so
Crown
does
Point again?
Crown Point, that's the town justice from, like, they set out the old jail there, that's where, Depp filmed this movie. They had, Dillinger, all those guys, Capone, they all went to Indiana, you know, Indiana, Wisconsin. You know, because it was really rural back then. For the war. Yeah. That's a museum piece. Yeah. Yeah. And he was the first one to design it too back then, if I read on the History Channel, where it was the leather, where it was in the coat. That's how they liked the coats drawn. They pull it up, and then they had sewn into the jackets mag holders, like 6 of them. And what, something on the FBI, like history of the FBI, they showed the company of the place that sewed it. Back then, even put like a serial number into the jacket. But they customized it, and because you'd never be able to tell that when they wore those nice jackets. You know, you assume they were. Yeah. They have at that museum, but the family got upset when they changed it a bunch of times. They had a Tommy gun on display because the Lake County Sheriff still has it in the safe. The one that Chicago went from. When they had the first escape, if I understand the story right, they went to the armory in Chicago, which was like on the south side, and got some Tommy guns from the army because all they had was just rifles, and they still had it.
Oh, no, we didn't buy those in the store.
Yeah.
We have
Well, they have that place in Vegas. You can find, you shoot them I've never gone. I really want to go check that out. My buddy's done it. He said it was a blast.
Frederick, the sheriff, fight that case?
No, I didn't see that one.
That is interesting. So, the Frederick sheriff, released out, he got a, basically got, call it, but they had some select fire gear come in wrote up a reasonable use list and said, yeah, we need 2 of these. And the sheriff has a buddy who runs a range.
Okay.
And he loaned out the select fire gear to the range guy to use it. And they said, well, it's not, it's improper use, county funds.
Yes, because if we were to a private, now if it was a strictly police-only range, they could have had. We were driving yesterday at about 8 o'clock to Bethesda. We came back from that Home Depot there in Democracy over by the mall. And the old Bloomingdale is there on Military. I said, John, stop. I said, look, stop. There was 2 armored personnel carriers and guys carrying guns.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be joined by my colleagues today, and it is no secret that the circus is in town this week. Speaker McCarthy's sideshow, the Default on America Act, is an extreme MAGA Republican wish list that has 0 chance of passing the Senate, and we'll see if it passes the House. Every minute wasted on Speaker McCarthy's empty gesture is a minute we get closer to default and Republican-manufactured recession. The markets are beginning to panic, and rating agencies have panned this plan that they say will significantly impact economic growth. This is what happens when you allow the most extreme members of that conference to write the budget and to dictate the priorities. We're joined today by Ranking Members Neal and Boyle, Ways and Means and Budget Committee, to discuss the consequences of the Republican default. And DPCC Chair Joe Neguse and Co-Chair Lauren Underwood are here to lay out the stakes of this week's vote. Make no mistake, House Democrats are ready to get to work to put people over politics and create better paying jobs and lower costs for Americans. Now I'd like to turn it over to Vice Chair Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. Democrats put people over politics, and we passed a number of laws last term to move the American family forward, from the American Rescue Plan to a bipartisan infrastructure law to laws that help veterans. But this radical Republican Default on America bill is going to roll back a lot of that progress. We created over 10 million jobs in the first 15 months of the Biden presidency, the most in U.S. history. This radical MAGA bill will not only tank the stock market, it will result in higher unemployment and kick off 600,000 Americans off their health insurance rolls, plus a 22% cut to veterans' care. So Democrats are going to be unified in opposing this radical bill, and the outcome that we seek is to have America follow the Constitution and pay the debts that have already been incurred, and then we're happy to talk with Republicans on what a future budget and spending and revenue package would look like. And with that, I'm going to invite up our amazing ranking member, Richie Neal, who's going to talk more about this Default on America Act.
Thanks, Ted. We need more of those introductions. So thanks to you and to Pete, and thanks to the team here as we go forward. So the arithmetic here ought to be pretty clear to everybody. This represents a threat to the dollar as an international currency, but it's also a reminder of the recklessness of this policy. And it goes like this. So George Bush cut taxes by $1.3 trillion in 2001 and came back with another $1 trillion. There was subsequent invasion of Iraq, 1.5 million new veterans that have been created because of these military incursions that we've had. And we're obligated, for obvious and good reason, to pay those veterans benefits and for those who have been wounded or harmed along the way. But back to arithmetic. So they voted for the pandemic relief. They have voted consistently for more defense spending. Some of them voted for the CHIPS Act. Some of them voted for the infrastructure bill. And all of them in 2017, December, voted to borrow $2.3 trillion. Borrow $2.3 trillion to provide tax cuts to the wealthiest amongst us. There have been $10 trillion worth of tax cuts over the last 25 years, and there has been no conversation from their side about putting the tax cuts on the table. So Speaker McCarthy got himself into this. And I think reasonable people would come to the conclusion that we should have a clear and sustained vote on the debt ceiling, and then we should begin the process of discussion and or negotiation as we're compelled. When I look at what this says to international markets, what I think it does in terms of the credibility of the United States in paying our bills, the full faith and credit of the United States becomes really important. So if you look at this dollar, the one thing we know about this dollar is that in international markets, it's always redeemed. No matter where you travel in the world, if you put the dollar on the table, if you're not in euro or you're not in sterling, that dollar will be redeemed. You could put it out, and they might say, well, we can't take it right now, but we can give you change in that currency. But the point is that this is a threat to the full faith and credit of the United States. Why they would choose to use this mechanism of the debt ceiling to try and compel negotiations escapes me. They have voted for all the measures that I've just pointed out. And now they want us to have sort of amnesia and say that all of a sudden this was created because Joe Biden became president. This goes back to those tax cuts from Bush in a time of warfare. It goes to the Trump tax cuts, and it goes to the pandemic spending. That's the bill that's in front of us today, and we should pay it. And by the way, this debt as a proportion of gross domestic product is manageable. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Pete.
Brendan Boyle, Ranking Member of the House Budget Committee, and as I've said before, you can always tell when there's a Democrat in the White House because Republicans suddenly start talking about deficit and debt. So here we are again. The debt ceiling has been raised 103 times since 1940. However, it wasn't until 2010, after the so-called Tea Party caucus won a majority in those elections, that for the first time in American history, we began to see the debt ceiling weaponized. Now, the other side wants to talk about being fiscally responsible. Let's be clear. There is absolutely nothing fiscally responsible about refusing to pay America's bills. As was just outlined before me, vote after vote after vote, we saw big bipartisan majorities vote for the spending that now the other side is refusing to pay that the bill has come due. I was here in the 4 years Donald Trump was president. 3 times the debt ceiling was increased. Many of the folks on the other side who are now refusing to raise it and refusing to pay America's bills unless there are deep, devastating cuts, they didn't say a peep about it those 3 times it was increased when Donald Trump was president. In fact, a number of those debt ceiling increases included spending increases as well in defense. So the hypocrisy here is staggering. But I also want to be clear that there are real-life consequences if this piece of legislation before us today were to somehow ever become law. It is the Default on America Act, DOA. Thank God it will be DOA in the Senate, even if it were to pass today. But that should not obscure what exactly it is that they've put on paper and that they're willing to vote for. 22% cuts. Here's the effect that would have, not according to anyone on the Democratic side of the aisle, but according to Moody's Analytics, nonpartisan, well-respected firm. 800,000 job losses would be incurred if this piece of legislation became law. The odds of a recession would dramatically increase. if this piece of legislation, the DOA Act, became law. So this is deeply irresponsible, as well as their entire brinksmanship on this issue. In 2011, it had real-life consequences. It led to the first ever credit downgrade in American history, which increased our borrowing costs, according to GAO, by over $1.3 billion. We cannot go through that again. We must not. We must ensure that America pays its bills. Those of us standing here, as well as all of our colleagues on our side of the aisle, is willing to do that and to get the job done. We just need a partner on the other side of the aisle. And with that, I am happy to yield to Chair Joe Neguse.
Well, good morning. Thank you to Ranking Member Boyle, Ranking Member Neal. Good to know that the Ways and Means Ranking Member carries cash. That's something that you want out of your Ranking Member for that committee. And of course, gratitude to Chairman Aguilar and to Vice Chair Lieu. I serve on the Rules Committee, and I participated last night in the markup that we had on the rule going into late into the morning until about 2:30. I don't know that I've participated in a hearing during my time in Congress where hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance was on more full display than yesterday, with extreme MAGA Republicans putting forward a bill, the Default on America Act, that would impose cruel, draconian cuts that would harm everyday Americans, and then denying that those cuts would indeed happen. Just to give you a sense of the stakes, and I think the choice, the unthinkable choice that Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans have put forward to the American people. On the one hand, they've threatened a Republican debt default. You heard from Ranking Member Boyle the consequences, catastrophic consequences, were that to happen. Unemployment doubling, hundreds, millions of jobs across our country lost. Stock market crashing, prices rising on everything and for everyone as seniors lose Social Security benefits, as veterans lose benefits. And on the other hand, the other side of that coin, what do they offer us? A ransom note in the form of the Default on America Act, legislation that would kick millions of Americans out of their homes, cut food benefits for the most vulnerable among us, lay off hundreds of thousands of first responders, teachers across our country, and again, increase costs on working families. That is not a choice that the American people should be forced to make. And that's why this legislation, the Default on America legislation, as Ranking Member Boyle articulated, is dead on arrival. Dead on arrival in the Senate. And at the end of the day, what we expect from our colleagues on the other side is to get serious, to not hold our economy hostage. So with us today, we have one of our DPCC co-chairs, Co-Chair Underwood, who will help articulate the work we have been doing, putting people over politics while Republicans threaten the American economy. With that, I'll yield to my colleague.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. We are here today because House Republicans are threatening to push the global economy off a cliff by refusing to pay our bills. Their Default on America Act is an unserious proposal and a terrible deal for the American people. Paying our bills should not be up for debate. Now, the suffering that a default would inflict should provide enough motivation for Republicans to get serious. But this proposal tells us that they aren't. So let me spell out what a default would look like. Millions of people will lose their jobs and the stock market will crash. Seniors will lose their savings, and Social Security recipients and our veterans will stop getting the benefits that they've earned. Car payments, student loans, credit card bills, and mortgages will skyrocket. Democrats are here to prevent this disaster and pay our bills just like we did 3 times under President Trump. But now, extreme MAGA Republicans are refusing to do so and holding our communities hostage for political games. The cuts in their Default on America Act are devastating for the people that we serve. They want to gut funding to our schools and take away childcare. They want to force towns across America to lay off first responders and tear food assistance away from families. We cannot allow that. Democrats have cut our deficit by $1.5 trillion already, and President Biden's budget will bring it down by another $3 trillion. The president's budget proves that we can cut our deficit and make investments in our communities. The United States of America has never defaulted on our debt, and Democrats are here putting people over politics. We pay our bills. We have a plan, and President Biden has outlined it. Now Republicans need to get serious because defaulting on our debt is non-negotiable, and so is the devastation that their plan will inflict. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to our chairman, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Co-Chair Underwood. Questions?
So you all have pointed out that the Republicans' plan here would cut benefits for everyday Americans and harm families. However, we are seeing the $31 trillion debt continue to be increased. I'm wondering, what do you all propose should happen with regards to the budget to prevent this conversation to keep happening year after year?
We think there are reasonable conversations to be had. We've never shied away from that. In the Ways and Means Committee, in the Budget Committee, in the Appropriations Committee, we think that there are reasonable policy considerations that we can debate. However, paying our bills is not up for discussion. So that's why we want to have these separate conversations. And as Ranking Member Boyle mentioned, we only have these conversations. Republicans only push this when Democrats are in the White House. That's unfortunate. But what we should have, we should pay our bills. We should ensure that we don't hit this crisis, this manufactured crisis by Republicans, and then we can have reasonable conversations about what our budget sustainability looks like now and in the future. And as Ranking Member Neal mentioned, that should include talking about the Republican tax scam from years ago and the $2.3 trillion that they swiped on the credit card to pay for it. All of those discussions should be up for debate.
Congressman, there have been some Democrats, most prominently Senator Manchin, who have urged President Biden to negotiate with Republicans on the debt ceiling. What's your response to the folks who are saying that, and is there a universe at all where, say, this bill does get out of the House today where you would support Democrats coming to the table on that?
Look, I'm not concerned about one senator's position because it takes 60 over there to turn the lights on and to get anything of substance done. So, that's the threshold. The question is, what has 60 votes, in the Senate? And I can tell you that this ransom note that Kevin McCarthy is potentially passing does not have 60 votes in the Senate. Let's get serious. Let's ensure that we pay our bills, and let's have budget and discussions about spending. In another time, in another committee room. That seems completely reasonable, but we stand ready to engage in those conversations. I know the White House is supportive of us having those discussions in the committee room about budgets and sustainability.
And what for Ranking Member Neal, if you don't mind, you mentioned that you mentioned that the debt to GDP ratio, in your opinion, is manageable.
It is manageable. We're on the other side of the pandemic.
Yeah, but the only time that the debt to GDP ratio has been as high is in the immediate aftermath of World War II. There's obviously a lot of geopolitical issues out there, including Russia, including China. Why is it that you think that we can manage this?
Because starting with the pandemic, I think that the relief that we put forward, which was an infusion of cash on a daily basis for people at the lower end to be able to carry on with their lives, we're now on the other side of that, as my point is taken. But we have to acknowledge that if there's going to be more defense spending because of the threat to Taiwan or because of what's happened with Ukraine, which they've all voted for, then that's going to be an ongoing challenge for us. But I go back a long enough way to know that there have been ups and downs to defense spending. When Reagan left, it was $315. When Clinton left, it was about $260. And then, because of the war in Iraq, it began to mount. So these increases can be managed as we go forward, but there has to be an acknowledgement that you have to pay for the initiatives that you want to be undertaken. And their tax cuts, as I noted, $10 trillion, where a former Republican leader said it was patriotic to cut taxes in a time of war. I don't think Abraham Lincoln would have said that. And so I look back at how we got to this point, and I put out a pretty good document that traces how we got here, with some of the comments and the tax cuts that took place along the way. So with Bush, as I pointed out, $2.3 trillion worth of tax cuts, and borrowing money for a tax cut in December of 2017, borrowing money. By the way, that's the day we won the House, because that tax cut did not go down well with the American people with borrowed money.
Thank you, sir.
So you guys were talking about the budget cuts proposed by Republicans. How willing are you to make that a campaign issue heading into 2024?
Look, we're not interested in talking about politics from this podium, but what I can tell you is that the American people are going to take note. They're going to take note that Republicans want to take food off of the tables of American families. They're going to take note that 600,000 people would lose health care if Kevin McCarthy's proposal moves forward. They're going to take note of these things because that affects them. And so we're going to keep talking about issues that affect everyday Americans because that's who we are. And because of the successes that we've had in the last year, CHIPS and Science Act, bipartisan infrastructure bill, gun safety legislation, those are the things that people care about. Unfortunately, this Republican majority wants to talk about banning books, banning kids from sports, and banning abortion care. That's who they are. And so we're happy to highlight that contrast in another venue.
How does this debt ceiling standoff end in your view?
I'll ask Vice Chair Liu to answer that one because it's a tough question, and then Ranking Member Boyle. Look, I mean, this is pretty easy. This should end how it ended 3 times when Donald Trump was in the White House. We should pass this clean. I said I wouldn't say those words. We should not default on our debt. That should be the guiding post of Democrats and Republicans. We should come forward, avoid default, and move on. And then we can have conversations about budget resolutions, about appropriations top lines, mark up 12 bills, send them over to the Senate, and then have our discussions and, you know, the top 4 and all of that stuff that normally happens in order to pass a budget. Vice Chair Liu, and then Ranking Member Boyle.
Thank you. So here's a reason that it will be impossible to make cuts in exchange for paying our bills. Because if we do this, then every single time this is going to happen. That's why when there's a government shutdown, we don't say, okay, we're now going to do X, Y, and Z. Because if we did that, then every time there would be a government shutdown, and we'd have to do X, Y, and Z. So again, we just have to pay our bills. That is just not negotiable. It's also in the Constitution, the full faith and credit clause of the United States. So we are simply not going to make cuts in exchange for paying our bills. We've got to pay our bills first. And with that, I have Brendan Boyle come up.
Well, thank you, Eric. It ends exactly the way it did the 3 times when Donald Trump was president, and it ends exactly the same way the previous 103 times since 1940, and that is ultimately Speaker McCarthy will have to have a bill on the House floor that raises the debt ceiling, period. We will also have separately, as we always do every single year, by September 30th at midnight, a budget bill for the next fiscal year, and perhaps for guidelines for years beyond. I think it's quite clear that that's what's going to happen, and that's the way this is going to end. And the quicker that we get to that point, the less likely it is that we incur some real meaningful damage to the overall economy. Unfortunately, we did not avoid that in 2011. We need to learn from those mistakes.
Can I follow up on that? You say that that's the only way that it ends, and that's the only way it has ended. You are counting on Republicans to blink, whether it's tomorrow or 5 minutes before you default. Is that what you're saying? They're going to blink?
No, look, I'm not saying that's a question for them. You can ask them. What I'm telling you is what should happen. The full faith and credit of the government should not be challenged, should not be held hostage. That's what House Democrats are saying. We're happy to have conversations about spending and deficits and debt and have these debates and discussions. But these should not be in the same sentence and on the same ransom note. That's what we're saying House Republicans are doing, because that's exactly what they're doing.
Just wanted to follow up real quick on, that's an interesting point to me. Would you consider something where the Republicans would be able to negotiate something on your side where you say, okay, we'll do this for the spending for 2023 if we pass a clean debt ceiling now? Would that be something you all would be open to?
Look, we've said time and time again that these conversations should not be linked. We should have conversations about the budget, about the appropriations top lines. We're happy to do that. And in divided government, that has happened and that will continue to happen, Democrats and Republicans. And by the way, you still need 60 votes over in the Senate. And so that's always been our mindset. You know, in a divided government, we're going to have conversations about, you know, top lines. What we are saying is that default should not be on the table. Kevin McCarthy should not be able to hold a default card over anybody who's negotiating anything to throw down on the table and to say, I want to wreck the U.S. economy. That's not how this should go, and we're going to continue to talk about that.
Last question. If McCarthy refuses to put the debt limit bill on the floor, would Democrats support a motion to vacate the speakership?
Look, we're not going to have discussions about hypothetical motions, but I think it's pretty clear from January on that Speaker McCarthy has to negotiate with the most extreme members of his conference because he has to, because his job is on the line. He's fine putting them in uncomfortable positions and making people wait 5 days and 15 votes, and looking the way he does and just sitting there and taking it from the most extreme members because he had to. He wants that job that much. He's willing to auction off everything possible. He's willing to say the bill's closed and then open it back up because people, had concerns about it. Which, by the way, I wanted to highlight, and it's a tribute to Ranking Member Neal. We very much appreciate Republicans going on the record talking about tax credits, biofuels tax credits, and the work that Ranking Member Neal and the Ways and Means members did. The Inflation Reduction Act is amazing. We appreciate that House Republicans are now seeing that and that they're hearing about it back home. That's the only reason why they're making a change is because that bill, that tax credit, that piece of legislation is popular back home. We appreciate that acknowledgement.
What if House Republicans introduce a motion to vacate the speakership? Would Democrats jump on that?
Look, that's a question for the whip and a question for another day. We'll have conversations about that. I think all of us have expected since January that at some point over these next 2 years that was likely going to happen. When you have to negotiate with the most extreme members of your conference, that's what you have to do. Last question.
So there are now some revised projections that the debt ceiling could be reached weeks sooner than initially anticipated. As the leadership here, what is your message to people who are hearing this and they're concerned about the direction that things appear to be headed?
People should be scared. I'm going to ask Joe Neguse and Lauren Underwood to close us out. People should be frightened that Republicans want to negotiate, that they feel compelled to continue to advocate for removing food off the table of everyday Americans, to kick people off of health care. Those are the negotiating points that they are fighting so hard for, and people should be scared about them.
Yeah, I would echo the remarks of the chairman, and would simply say that Americans should be deeply disappointed and I think disheartened by the actions that extreme MAGA Republicans have taken in the House thus far in the first 100 days, and of course culminating now in holding literally our entire economy hostage with the demands that they've made for these cruel and draconian cuts that will harm everyday Americans. So obviously the stakes are very high. House Democrats will continue to put people over politics and push our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to see the light. I would say, just to underscore the point that Chairman Aguilar made, because this came up during rules last night. Again, I don't know how many of you all watch the proceedings at 1 a.m. But just to give you a sense, I suspect not many, but and I don't blame you for that. But to give exactly, but to give you exactly to give you a sense of the room, midnight in Washington, where are House Republicans in a back room in the Rules Committee, literally a cigar smoke-filled room, cutting deals that would bankrupt the American viewer. And the only reason they were able to ultimately get that Default on America bill within the rule at a committee to the floor today is because of a deal they negotiated literally at 1:30 in the morning last night to preserve President Biden's biofuel tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's a question that I hope all of you ask some of our colleagues on the other side from the most extreme wing of their caucus, why they made the decision at the 11th hour to support President Biden's climate provisions. I think it'd be an interesting question to ask.
But to follow up on that, Leader Scalise was saying this would be a prime time for the president to sit down and speak with Speaker McCarthy. With this tighter deadline now, would you agree with him or no?
President Biden has put forward his proposal that would cut the deficit by an additional $3 trillion. We have a plan. Democrats are united behind that plan, and that is the plan that puts people over politics. We have not seen what I would consider realistic or serious plan coming from the extreme MAGA Republicans. Instead, they have put forward this proposal that wants to take away health care from people, take away food from working families in this country, and that wants to cut veterans' benefits. It's unacceptable. And so we're focused on delivering for our communities, and they are trying to accommodate the most extreme voices in their Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
he's like,
I was trying not to.
Yeah.
He's like, Neil was super animated. Yeah. So cool.